Hi, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's How She Does It. We're changing the pace. We've had two academics in a row. So I thought, let's have somebody who actually understands what's happening to the world economy and really can impress us with her knowledge. So Fatima Vawda and I actually have to confess right up front, go back a very long way. We were at university together, and she has done infinitely better than any of us because she was the smarty pants in our group, in our friendship group, getting an MSc in applied maths at the time. And obviously, naturally, has progressed in leaps and bounds and is now the founder and managing director of the financial services group called 274. She'll tell us all about that name. She's also non-executive director of Pearsec, which is the old Peregrine Group. She has, I won't say how many years experience because that gives us all away, Fatima, but a very long experience as a practitioner in the domestic, African, and international capital markets. And over the years, she's received so many accolades, I cannot even tell you, domestically and internationally, having won the Ernst & Young World Entrepreneur South African Emerging Category Award. She's part of the Financial Sector Transformation Council. She's the director of the Association of Savings and Investments South Africa. She's going to speak to me about my savings and investments, which are hopeless. And is the deputy chairperson of the Financial Services Working Group of the South African chapter of BRICS. So, with that very impressive set of accolades, I want to welcome you, Fatima. Hello.
Hello, Aspasia, gorgeous Aspasia. Always great to speak to you. This is just speaking to you in the broader forum. So thank you for having me on your show.
Yes. Well, I mean, I decided a few weeks ago that actually I just needed some inspiration from women that I admire and women that I pick up at coffee shops. It transpires. Coffee shops and cocktail parties. And since I have none of those, I have to pick up everyone on Zoom and do that now. I like your earphones, Fatima.
Thank you. They're fabulous, aren't they? I have two teenagers, so I go shopping with them and they choose my earphones. So thank you for that. I'll let them know.
So Fatima, tell me a bit. I mean, obviously, the way we try to do this show, such as it is really to just get into how one got to where one is as a woman, and especially a woman in often like fields that are not traditionally enabling for women. And certainly, I think finance, high finance, investments, all of that, and applied maths, I might add, is, I mean, I remember that you were one of the few girls in the applied maths department.
Yeah, I mean, if we go back, I grew up in Lenasia, which is just south of Johannesburg, in the 70s. I went through public schooling, and then really, arranging this session today brought back a lot of nostalgia because I thought of our days at Wits University and how that really
nostalgia is the overwhelming theme of COVID.
So, it really brought back a lot of memories about how the people around me influenced the shape of my life and the future that was formed as a result of those experiences that we had on campus, which was incredibly rewarding. So I got to university. I studied applied maths and mathematics in undergrad. And by the way, it was a great course in terms of the breadth of its subject matter, running all the way from mathematical physics, optimization, through to financial mathematics, which is what I kind of got into afterwards. Interestingly, optimization is now one of the fundamental bases of artificial intelligence, which is really changing the way we're thinking about things going into the future. So,
if I may digress for a moment, one of the things that I remember, which gave me such delight at Wits, was when you would show me the algorithms as
So all the fancy graphs and the technology that you
graph
use.
paper, and it was so beautiful. Like, I mean, it was actually completely sublime, and I was always delighted that there was this cross section of like art, algorithms, mathematical algorithms could also be so beautiful at the same time.
Well,
So
mathematics is all about creativity. And, you know, these days I use very little of that creative knowledge in the sense, in the true sense of the word. And you know, going on to entrepreneurship, it's all about surrounding yourself with really, really smart people. So now we have PhDs in mathematics and physics and those type of professions who sit around me and do that all day. And I do the rest of everything, which is building a business. So, I mean, the one thing was I landed up completing an MSc degree in mathematics, but what I learned quite quickly was that it was not what I wanted to do in my life from the aspect of academia. I wanted to get my hands dirty and join the industry. So then I joined a financial services company and started working as an employee and worked for a boss. And having worked for a boss for, what was it, 12 years, you know, that experience really then catapulted me into starting up my own business. But I have to, you know, talk about working for a boss. And I think, you know, there's a guy I follow quite closely on Twitter, and his name is Naval Ravikant. He's a very successful investor in the US and also likes to share thoughtful insights on entrepreneurship on Twitter. And I think it was recently him who tweeted the following advice, and I'm going to paraphrase it. He said, when you work at a company, always act like you are the owner. Eventually, you will be treated as the owner, and someday you will eventually be the owner. So I think this is very, very good advice. It's the advice that I followed, and eventually I owned it. You know, it's good advice to young people joining the industry, that whatever you do, once you start committing yourself and owning things and being invested in what you do, success does naturally follow.
So Fatima, I mean, did you always imagine yourself as the MD, the boss, the boss? Did you?
So,
Is
I
that
mean,
how
you know,
you?
having said that, I worked for over a decade in the private sector. I wanted to do things differently, and I wanted to eventually own it and make it my own. And when you want to do things differently and own it, being in bureaucratic environments become incredibly difficult, and lots of red tape, and that's what the corporate environment is all about. But also experiencing South Africa has undergone numerous challenges and numerous changes since 1994. You know, our economy has opened up from a global perspective. Opportunities became available. Transformation was a big thing. You know, our sector was very tightly held by a few people, particularly the financial services sector. So that created a lot of opportunities to do things differently. And if I think back, you know, you could count on your fingertips the number of women or Black investment professionals in our industry when I entered the industry. And, you know, there's been a fantastic emergence of a lot of players since then. So we've really experienced a lot of change over the past 20 years, some for the better, some for the worse, some, you know, we feel that not much has moved. But, you know, things like COVID, things like inequality, the dynamic movement of capital, Donald Trump, you know, makes us think about all kinds of things.
Let's break it down. Give me a sense. Firstly, I mean, I see that apparently airlines are now a very bad way to invest, but I see also on your. Firstly, what is the future of the global economic environment given what we're experiencing right now? I mean, 2008 was a disaster for the millennials. Is this now a disaster for the next generation, your kids, mine?
So, you know, I mean, I've thought. In fact, Wits recently invited me to do a public speech on at the recent graduation, but the graduations were not held. And I thought about what would I say to this generation of graduates? And what I thought about was that every generation has its own challenges. Can you imagine the youth who went through the First World Wars and the Second World Wars? Every generation really goes through their different challenges. I mean, we had our own challenges growing up during apartheid, really sitting back and reflecting and thinking, was there any door that was going to open to us? I remember being shot with rubber bullets in Senate House, and would we ever overcome? And yes, we did overcome. So every generation has its own challenges, and we learn about these lessons from history. Taking the current environment into the global economy into perspective, it's the level of panic and risk that entered the market was way more significant than what we saw in the peak of the global financial crisis. I mean, even at the peak of the global financial crisis, businesses and economies did not shut down. They continued, and monetary and fiscal policy worked to abate some of those risks. But what we're seeing and experiencing right now is way more significant and larger than what we experienced ever in the last 50 years or so. So I think economies are responding. They're trying to respond as best as they can, but the real impact will follow through in a couple of months, where we start to see the actual numbers, because it's very, very difficult to actually make sense of what the real picture looks like.
Do you think that we overreacted by
I
shutting
think
down the economies in this way? Should we have all gone the Swedish route?
there's a lot of opposing views on this, and I've been following the medical professionals, Professor Karim versus our own graduate and someone that I grew up with from Lenasia, Professor Shabir Mahdi, talking about the confusion around some of the modeling and the data stats, etc. So, I mean, there's opposing views on whether it was the right thing to do. I think it was the right thing to do to get our medical system and our healthcare system up to speed, and we kind of used the time to flatten the curve. So I think it was important to do that. But I do think that South Africa and where we are as an economy at this stage cannot afford the luxury to stay closed for too long, given that our government is bankrupt and there's no more money to pay for anything else. So we've got to be cognizant of the potential impact it will have.
So how do you stay positive?
How do you stay positive?
In the markets and trying to, invest wisely for your clients.
I know it's incredibly difficult. We are custodians of capital, and we've got to make very good decisions on behalf of the public's money that we manage. And so there's a broad spectrum of investments that one can make. And ultimately, that's where the mathematics component comes into play, because we kind of evaluate different sources of risk and different sources of return and try to build portfolios that can be robust and withstand such type of unprecedented events when they do occur. And that's the skills of asset management and professional investment practitioners in the industry. So, I mean, as an investment professional, we have diverse teams within which we work. The skills kind of all complement each other. So you're going to have multiple debates and arguments around where and how to invest. And hopefully at the end of the day, we try and do a good job.
Too much divestment. So Fatima, let's take a different tack. Often people ask on the sidebar, did you have a mentor? Did you have, and actually we do want people to please ask questions, and I will get to them in the second part of the interview. So ask them on the live chat, guys. But my question was, did you have a mentor ever in over the course of your career, or perhaps as a young woman?
I think the big thing was during apartheid, we grew up within our own communities. And growing up in the Indian community, there's a lot of pressure amongst families and parents to have an education. Amongst Indians, the big thing is you've got to become a doctor, lawyer, or CA. There's a lot of pressure and emphasis on building a career, and I think a lot of that comes from the close knit community
Very
that
similar
I grew
in
up
the
in.
Greek community.
So I mean, a lot of that comes from there. But having said that, I never took that path, and you would know from campus life that there was a lot of sectarian elements at the time, and there was the Greek corner and the Indian corner, but we never played within those corners.
We didn't. We left the corners. We sat on the fountain.
Exactly, and I think that operating in an unprejudiced environment and furthering your thoughts and how you would pave your future was critically important. I mean, you've still got to persevere in the face of adversity. You've got to have that sense of fearlessness. You've got to be street smart and savvy. You've got to be quick to respond to market dynamics. You've got to surround yourself with very clever people, because what I've learned is very clever people make you look good at the end of the day. So I like doing that, and being aware of your strengths and weaknesses. And then we all have a lot of shortcomings. One of my shortcomings is I don't think I have the level of emotional intelligence that a lot of my peers have. On the other hand, I'm too much of an activist in the industry, and I don't toe the line as much as my peers do. And sometimes not towing the line gets you in a lot of trouble, and I have been in a lot of trouble. But at the end of the day,
please tell us. I mean, it's like quite interesting to me, because obviously, it's quite a conservative industry, very male dominated, which Palesa is also asking here on the side. And she wants to know, how do you thrive in a sector that is so male dominated? And I also want to know that.
It's extremely male dominated, and you've got to continuously fight for your position, and you've got to continuously fight to ensure that your views are being taken into consideration. I think government has successfully transformed in terms of gender diversity, but I think the private sector has been incredibly slow in diversifying when it comes to gender. And when you do get an opportunity to have your voice heard, you've got to ensure that you carry the burden of that responsibility for everyone else. And that often takes a lot of emotional energy, and I've done quite a bit of that in the last 15 years in particular, being active in various industry bodies, and trying to bring about change, engaging various stakeholders, whether it's the National Treasury, of the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, the regulators, other colleagues in COs and industry bodies, to talk about the plight of diversity, race, and gender, and how important it is to be able to achieve a balance in the topography of the sector.
So how do you make changes in?
So I think one is to get a seat at the table. Once you got a seat at the table, which I've worked my way to getting a seat at the table. Once you have a seat at the table, it's really about then being vocal, whether it's through being vocal on having strong views or conducting research. And I always find that data science is very, very powerful, because numbers don't lie. And when you start putting numbers in front of people and you talk about the topography not being balanced, it's hard for people not to respond to changes that need to be brought into place. So that's really, I've done that through some of the research I've produced. I've written extensively, and I've participated very actively in the bodies that I am active in.
Let's talk a bit about the name of your company. I mean, initially I thought you might just be turning, you might just be turning, the
turning time around
kind of theme on its head. But
So the name comes from, refers to the date of freedom in South Africa, 1994, the 27th of April, 1994. So 27/4 is to 27th of April. I really took inspiration from the hope during that era as apartheid ended, the hope that South Africa would not plunge into anything. It just represented so much for me at the time. It represented change. It represented moving forward prosperously. It represented everything that I drew so much inspiration from. And so when I had the opportunity to start something of my own, I really wanted it to represent that change that we were bringing into South Africa. And at the time, I think we were one of the first Black-owned companies and women-driven businesses when I established the business. So it fell in well with people talk about values and mission statements, etc. So this is really reflects the DNA of what we do. And everything we've done so far has focused on financial inclusion and not leaving the marginalized out of the system, which was one of the beliefs that underpinned the establishment of 27/4. So the products and services that we offer, the investment into social the capital, the investment into people, how we invest from a responsible investment perspective, from an environmentally safe perspective, you know, all of these things are underpinned by that date.
And those values. So, speaking of values, Kirsty wants to know how you maintain your high work ethic, which I think is part of the values that you were describing. Like when you have a seat at the table, how do you represent? What is it that you bring to that seat? So
So
perhaps.
consistency is incredibly important. Trust, one of my sister companies in the industry is Coronation, and you would see their payoff line which says trust is earned. And I strongly believe in that motto, that people start to respect you as you've got to earn the respect, and you can only earn the respect through consistency, through hard work, determination, and all of those things which are not really easy. Some of my colleagues in the industry always tell me, Fatima, you always take the difficult road. You're not in for a quick buck. You always do the most difficult things and you follow the hard route. But I think taking the hard route has paid off in this respect. And it's about building long-term sustainability. So you've got to build that resilience and the tenacity to face the challenges and face any kind of adversity.
Speaking of adversity, have you had any that, and how did you deal with it in terms of your working life and also?
So I think the biggest challenge was in South Africa. We deal with a lot of corporates, we deal with a lot of retirement funds, we deal with individuals, and moving away from the safety of believing that only large monopolies and typically white men can manage money better than black women, or even being black. Or so it's the double barrel challenge that you face. And those were really the biggest challenges that I faced in the industry. But again, you earn your respect. You've got to stick to it. You can't give up. And the early days were really, really hard.
And in terms of your family, I mean, you have two children.
So I have a husband who's got a PhD in physics. And 2 years ago, he decided that he's going to become a stay-at-home dad. So depending on the time of the day, he's either on sabbatical, or he's a stay-at-home dad, or he's an academic. But I would say he's all three. And that allows me to spend 18 to 20 hours a day working and just having a lot of fun. My kids are fairly balanced. They're quite academic as well, and like to philosophize and read and do all the challenge you and keep you on the straight and narrow. So I quite enjoy
Buy
that.
you good earphones.
Buy me cool earphones, 100%.
So, I mean, coming back to the financial sector in South Africa, Katie wants to know, are we going to struggle after the crisis?
So it's going to be hard. It's going to be really, really tough. So our unemployment has risen dramatically, and I think we'll still see those unemployment numbers rise even further. I mean, just before the COVID-19, we were sitting at just over 25 to 30% unemployment. We're potentially going to see that rise to probably around the 50% level. Our estimations for GDP coming into 2020 was going to be 1% odd. The IMF and the World Bank's now saying we're going to contract by over 6% this year. So things are going to be tough for a long time. I think it's going to take a couple of years to get us back to a level playing field. I think we started off weak. And COVID, pushed us down even further. Government has responded positively through the various stimulus packages, but we don't have the muscle that other economies have. We've had a 2.75 interest rate cut that's provided some relief to ordinary South Africans. But at the same time, a lot of companies are closing down, they're retrenching. So we're in for a really tough time. I don't think the situation is much more pleasant anywhere else in the world. We've gone through so much immigration of financial capital from high net worth individuals and ordinary South Africans who have taken their capital out. We've seen that migration happen in droves in the past couple of years. So unfortunately, we've got to put our heads together, stakeholders. We've got to support the president. We've got to support his cabinet. We've got to support him in his efforts to ignite the economy. And as the private sector, we've got to come to the party. And as the public sector, together with Labour and all the other players that can influence the direction of the economy and remain invested and own it.
Yes. So I think, Kate, we can say it will be tough.
It's going to be tough. It's going to be, yeah, I think it's going to be real tough.
Kirsty is asking, how could you codify how you built your resilience?
I think so. It's a tough one because, I compare, often you sit back and you reflect and you think about your colleagues or your friends and the communities within which you grew up in. And I think a lot had to do with the community within which I grew up in. We grew up, I keep on saying that we grew up in a very closed community during apartheid. I grew up with a single mum and 3 other siblings, and an uneducated mum. And, things were tough and you build a lot of resilience and you build, I think what came out of that was the ability to take on risk, because to be an entrepreneur, if you can't withstand risk, if you're too risk averse, you're not going to identify opportunities nor participate in any potential opportunities. And that built a lot of resilience because I know what being poor is like, and I know what that feels like. And I think that really builds a strong foundation to be able to withstand a lot of toughness that you experience later on.
And if you could give your younger self, if you could speak to your younger self now, what would you tell her?
So, I mean, the one thing, whilst we grew up in those communities, the one thing we never had, which I see my kids have today, was access to, a lot of sporting facilities and being a lot more active. We were very kind of academic and focused on that aspect more. We had brown sand soccer fields and playing fields. We never had green grass and those wonderful parks and that you see at the schools, which my kids have been fortunate to be able to go to. And I think having that well-balanced life of being active, whilst at the same time, all-rounded, being exposed to different things. You kind of missed out a little bit on that, and playing a lot of catch-up now on doing a lot of those things, because I've had the opportunity to be able to do a lot of those things.
Oh, tell me a bit about that.
So you know what they say, I turned 50 this year, and the record number of people that participate in marathons and big sporting events internationally are always 39-year-olds or 49-year-olds or 59-year-olds. So I quite enjoy I quite enjoy my walks. I spend an enormous amount of time just walking in my neighborhood, and I've recently taken to a little bit of running. And my kids say I hop and skip, and that's not run, but that's perfectly fine. I'm enjoying my hopping and skipping, but just gives you a lot of time to take in and absorb and think and strategize and do all the, it's a wonderful opportunity to just take some time out.
Yeah, I mean, people do say that just don't actually put your earphones in. Take the time to just let your mind drift as you run. You'll actually have some of your best thoughts, or as you hop
Absolutely.
and jump,
Absolutely.
as the case may be. Janine Forster is asking us, knowing what you know now, would you work in the financial sector again when you were younger?
Absolutely. One, my passion for analytics, coupled with my passion for the global economy, and the financial sector is the perfect place to be able to apply what I like. And often it's incredibly difficult for people to enjoy what they do, and you find that quite a bit, where people do things because it makes commercial sense, but they often don't enjoy what they're doing. And so yes, I wouldn't swap it for anything. And I think
So,
it's also a fantastic sector to be able to make a difference. If I rewind a few years ago, very few South Africans were in fact banked. We've managed to successfully improve financial inclusion across South Africa. More South Africans have bank accounts than they had 10 or 15 years ago. The success has not been that great, but small steps in financial education, in teaching people about to save for their retirement. And those are wonderful contributions that you can make. But also the direction of global capital and holding company management accountable. A few years ago, we had that experience with Steinhoff, and just the influence that we can have through being an activist investor. You can hold the management of companies who are allocating shareholder capital to do the right thing and be accountable for those decisions that they make. So, I find that as a very important responsibility, and being accountable is
yeah.
you can have that ability to do social good while at the same time being a capitalist. And I think guys like Yanis Varoufakis, and who I'm a huge fan of, and Thomas
Oh,
Piketty, and those guys would talk about how capitalism eats democracy, and whether it's not a utopian environment that we operate in. But I think you can be a capitalist with a social conscience.
well, I mean, and they've shown quite significantly how the small micro investments in women, for example, have completely radically altered just in poverty in all sorts of countries like India.
Absolutely. I mean, there's phenomenal examples in South Africa. There's phenomenal examples. We have some really, really interesting businesses. We've partnered with National Treasury's Jobs Fund to start up something called the Black Business Growth Fund, where we support mid-market businesses that are not listed, to transform, to create jobs, to fuel the economy. So there's fantastic examples of how you can deploy capital successfully with generating very good investment returns, but without compromising the social component of it. And when we talked about the responsibility of future generations, we have to think about things like climate change, and the decisions we make today and how that could impact going forward.
So, Fatima, what's the next step?
I think the next step is
Sounding very
consolidate.
presidential, I have to say.
No, the next step is, I want to create more employment, and then, it gives me a lot of joy to make a contribution to the South African economy. Our economy has been good to me, and I've got to give back to our people. And, it's being done in various different ways. But can you imagine the wonderful opportunity to be able to expand on that and create more jobs and create more opportunities for intellectual capital across all colors and genders, and just create those opportunities that I never had, perhaps, or that someone else gave to me. Being able to give that to young people is an incredibly rewarding feat.
It is. So, Blickies Baker said, you just mentioned social conscience. I love that you have a balance of philanthropy in your business and life. What motivates this?
What motivates it? I think it's again the environment within which we operate. South Africa has been divisive for a very long time. We've got a history that is unique to anywhere else in the world, and that history has shaped us. And how we use that history and how we take that to build a future for our kids. I'm 100% invested in South Africa. And a lot of my peers in the industry, or if you go to braais or parties, are talking about immigrating, etc. We don't have that opportunity. We are invested here, and we've got to make it work, and we've got to make the contribution.
It's inspiring. I knew you were the right one for this afternoon. And finally, I think we're going to start winding down. We're going to take Moteng's question. He says, how would you advise women in non-finance careers to be financially literate? And this was actually something I was thinking about quite a lot before, because I was thinking women naturally band together in quite a investment minded way. So if you think of stokvels, if you think of burial societies, these are small scale investment operations. People.
In fact, households across Africa are driven by the women of the household. Women across the continent manage the purse in the family. And so women have enormous skills at budgeting and doing all the very important things that are simple but most effective. There is a ton of information online that's available. The regulator in South Africa runs something called Money Smart Week every year, where there's initiatives that they drive the entire week to be able to provide financial education, consumer financial education. Consumer financial education is actually a core component of our sector code. Our financial sector have a transformation code, and a big component of our annual turnover has to go towards consumer financial education. So there's a lot of material available. There's a lot of initiatives. You've just got to go out there. You've got to look for it. And again, a lot of these things are extremely simple. It's exactly like managing your budget at home. But put that money away, save for the future. Don't become dependent on the state.
Fatima, that's a wonderful place to end. I just want something lighthearted to complete this interview. What is the first thing you're going to do post-lockdown?
I'll cut my hair. Go for a haircut. I haven't been for a haircut in 3 months, and I generally have my haircut once a month. So I'm going for my haircut, and I'm going to for a good massage.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so very much. This was really inspiring. And I will see you on the outside.
Absolutely. It was wonderful catching up with you. Gorgeous as ever. Thank you, Aspasia. Take care, everyone. Cheers.
Ciao, Fatima. Thank you.